Okay, welcome everybody. My name is David Gross. I'm the director of the Kavli Institute for Theoretical Physics, which is where you are if you're not sure. And welcome to KITP Sci Art 2011. I see a lot of faces here that I don't normally see at the KITP, and that's wonderful. We've tried to attract more than our regular visitors to our public lectures on string theory and black holes and superconductivity to our events that and exhibitions and lectures that incorporate art into the KITP and make connections between art and science, which we at the KITP think is very important. So I just, for my curiosity, how many of you have never been to the KITP before? Well, that's very good. So I would say about a quarter to a third of the audience. So those of you who've never been to the KITP before, I hope you're not totally frightened by the theoretical physics aspect of it, and I would invite you to come back, not just for the exciting art that you've seen today and will hear about in the next hour or two, but also for the science. We have a very good series of public lectures. We have a wonderful community organization called the Friends of the KITP. You're welcome to join our mailing list, join the Friends, or just join our mailing list for other events which connect to art. I don't know how you heard about this, but no matter how you heard, you can connect to us in a more permanent basis by putting your name on that list, an email address preferably, or right outside this door there are cards about the Friends of the KITP where you can also participate in some of our other community outreach activities. So my role today is really one of just enjoying the occasion, and I'm here only to introduce Peter Frank, who is going to lead a introduction to the exhibit, which many of you have seen, and a discussion session with the artists, almost all of whom are here. Peter is involved in all sorts of art history, art criticism, museum curation. Do you say curation?
Curatorship.
Sorry?
Curatorship.
Curatorship. Okay, I stand corrected. He was educated in art history at Columbia University and writes for many publications, including the Huffington Post, Fabric Magazine. He's a curator at the Riverside Art Museum, editor of various quarterlies and magazines, an art critic for the LA Weekly, and before he left New York for publications in New York, and he has curated in many places, taught in many places, published many publications, monographs, books, catalogs, even poetry, it turns out. And there's a full biography outside if you want to learn more, or just Google, right? Peter has been to the KITP a few times and is very interested in the kind of art that we have connected to, especially under the guidance and inspiration of Jean-Pierre Hébert, our artist in residence, and one of the exhibitors in today's exhibit. So, without further ado, I'm going to leave it to the people who know so much more about this stuff, and turn over the mic to Peter, who's already mic'd.
Oh, right.
We will try. Peter is going to. You are mic'd.
Yeah, this is for is this broadcasting?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're both broadcasting and recording.
Good.
And we will try to involve the audience. Peter would like to open up to questions and answers. If you want to talk, we will try to get you a mic, because everything we do here is recorded, will go online, and be available to you and your friends in the future. And then after we finish this discussion, there will be a further reception outside in the courtyard immediately afterwards. And of course, the exhibit is still open, and the artists are here. Peter, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gross. Thank you. I'm going to talk from a sitting position and subsequently interview the artists one at a time. They'll gather up here with me. We'll see the artists assembled want to discuss matters among themselves, but sooner or later, and I hope sooner, we'll open up the discussion to the rest of the audience as well. I'm guessing that the audience is composed heavily of artists and scientists, and that's exactly the kind of mix that you want to be talking with, because after all, in a sense, the artists who are going to be talking with us are scientists as well. Their degrees aren't in science, although I might be wrong even in that. But they have studied the science that has fed into their work, and thus their interest in inquiry parallels those of scientists themselves. After all, from one angle at least, art is a specialized form of applied physics. It's a very eccentric form, to be sure, but optimally it is symptomatic of the whole idea of science. The idea being to figure out how the universe works. That is to say, figure out how the universe seems to us so marvelous, so miraculous. Maybe religion is part of that too, but that is, for better or worse, is not part of the discussion today. As you know, the arts and the sciences are all members of the same family. They used to live together under the same roof. Now that they reside separately, perhaps, and indeed at some distance from one another, they still love to get together with one another when time permits and impulse prompts. And I think the exhibit here is a prompting of that instance. That said, there's a lot of art that passes itself off as engaged in science, but that does not so much engage science as illustrate it, as picture science. I mean, of course, there's a lot of art that purports to be involved with various aspects of human in perception and endeavor, but really illustrates it. That this work, however, is engaged with scientific principle, with investigation into the application of laws and theories of physics. The work does not simply look like science. It looks as if it has embodied scientific process. And it has. And thus it displays the effects of scientific principle. And I was going to say mimic, but in this case, no. It recapitulates the results of those principles, you could say, except that those principles themselves are deduced from observed results. In that sense, the process of making art is the mirror image of the process of doing science. A scientist deduces from the data that the universe provides how the universe is working. The artist applies such data to remake an alternate universe, or at the very least add to the universe and, in a sense, help clarify its method of working. We see, now when I say that, the work upstairs demonstrates less the fundaments of scientific principle than the qualities, that is, the logic and the resulting beauty and fascination, the play of stability and instability, the play between dynamic force and stasis, between physical presence and void. The majority of artists upstairs work with the most abstract of physical properties and postulates. A couple of them work with more purely pictorial or even realistically observed formations that evince the physical properties. In fact, it's probably wise for me to speak first with the artist I feel upstairs is most involved with the observation as opposed to the application of the laws of physics, of scientific principle. Victor Raphael's work, as you saw, depicts or somehow captures the phenomena that are studied in astronomy and the phenomena that are studied both terrestrial and extraterrestrial. And I'd like to ask Victor to join me to discuss what his approach to those phenomena are, what he intends them to be, and how he goes about demonstrating them. So,
should we get the images up?
Yes,
we have here?
Exactly.
Okay. Let's see here.
Oh yeah, let me get you a mic.
Okay, great.
Oh yeah.
Let's see. Let's try this again.
Okay.
Jump here, just Command A. Thank you. Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Peter. First of all, I want to just thank Jean-Pierre for including me in this show, and also David for providing the forum here to exhibit art with science in this context. It's just, I'm very pleased to be showing here, and not unusual. Is it on? Hello? Testing? Oh, I see. How about now? Okay, good. Could you hear what I said before? Okay, well, to say it again, I want to thank Jean-Pierre for including me in this exhibition, David for providing the venue here, which I think is an extraordinary opportunity to have a marriage of art and science, and also thank you, Peter, for leading the quality discussion that we're going to have here. I do a very large body of work which includes painting, photography, video, digital technology, printmaking, and what I'm exhibiting here is actually a very small part of what I do, but two particular series that are very central to my work. The first that I'm showing you is a body of work that I call the Getty Water Series. And this particular work, I don't know how many of you know the Getty Villa in Malibu. They have that wonderful long peristyle pool in the patio there. And what I've done for many years is go up there and take photographs with my Polaroid camera, and I've been using my Polaroid camera for about 30 years, and I take photos of the patterns of the ripples of the water that are created by the sunlight, by the fountains that are there. And then what I do is I bring these home to my studio, and then what I do is add applications of gold leaf and copper leaf and variegated metal leaves to the surface emulsion of the Polaroid, hoping to transform these images from basic studies of water into something hopefully more than that. And I use these Polaroids not only as works of art in and of themselves, but they become studies for me that I then extrapolate into larger works on canvas, sometimes on mylar, and sometimes in other medias. So I'm going to go through a few of these here so you can see some of these. And these are both 600 and Spectra Polaroids. I like the Polaroid material in particular because it's something that everyone understands. We all have an experience with it. It's sort of like a very common denominator. And yet what I'm interested in doing is somehow elevating these things into unique works of art.
Two questions right away, Victor. Are you finding it more and more difficult to find the material, the Polaroid?
Yeah, absolutely. It's become a real challenge, although there's a company in Holland who has purchased all of the manufacturing equipment from Polaroid, and they're now producing new film. It's actually about twice as expensive as Polaroid used to sell it for, and it wasn't cheap when Polaroid sold it, but it is available still, which is very, very nice. I do have a little bit of a cachet that I put away that I still shoot with. So
I would, by the way, I would recommend, particularly if they're a Dutch company and likely to be interested in supporting the arts, that you contact them, let them know what you're doing and how you're doing. You might be able to buy in volume from them at a reasonable price.
Thank you. Good idea.
Also tell them how weak the dollar is.
So again, I'm going to show you just some more from this particular series. We're only supposed to show our work for about 5-6 minutes, so I'm going to go through these kind of quickly. And this piece here I want to focus on because this was actually a study for a work on canvas that you'll see next. And you can see what I'm doing when I do the canvases is not necessarily just blowing up the work to make a large version of the small one, but again, I'm very interested in transforming the work and using the motif or the pattern in order to inform the painting. So this was actually created from that pattern, but is now gold and metal leaf on canvas at a scale of about 36 by 42 instead of a scale of 4 inches by 4 inches.
It occurred to me before that already the little Polaroids are being blown up to canvas size by being projected here, and that we already get the sense of this enveloping field, of visual field.
You know, Peter, I think that's actually even more evident in the next series, which is the Space Field series. And in this one, you know, the idea for me, as I was a kid growing up in the late 50s, I was very interested in being an astronaut, actually taking that ride out into space. And as I got older, I kind of realized it wasn't going to happen. So I sort of used my art in a way to create a fantasy of myself kind of traveling through the universe, if you will, and documenting, as a tourist would, what they see along the journey. And for me also, there's a macro-micro connection here, because I think that there is a connection between the forms, the visual forms that we see in space and what we see under the microscope. And I also feel that these images of outer space, which have only come into existence in our lifetimes, are the most profound visual images of our time. And I think that as an artist, I have been attracted to this. And initially, when I did these pieces, I was taking snapshots with my Polaroid off of documentaries of things that would come back and broadcasted to Earth from outer space. What I've done now is I've evolved that process to the point where I'm making digital movies of Hubble imagery with very, very long dissolves between the imagery in order to create hybrid images, so that it's not a pure Hubble image, but what it is again a merged image of other elements, which for me then as an artist allows me to take off on it and not be wedded to the science of it, but go off on the fantasy of it, the imaginative part of it, the visual kind of exploration of it.
I'm glad you mentioned the Hubble imagery in particular, because the availability of this imagery through the Hubble telescope in the last decade or so has reawakened our appreciation of the poetics of the images of the universe, the images, you know, the ionosphere. I guess you could call it the images beyond the available to us beyond the ionosphere. after the initial collection of such imagery in the 50s and 60s and its promulgation during the period of off-Earth exploration, these images became something of a cliche. And I would say that in the 70s and 80s, interest waned in looking at them, at depicting them. They became kind of ciphers for just what happened to be out there. But now, with new images available to us, there's at least one website that's just nothing but glorious multicolor photographs of galaxies crashing into one another and nebulae blossoming forth. That there's a taste again for this kind of imagery and a rekindling of fascination from a non-scientific, but as well a scientific point of view of what's going on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's a very special time for artists now. I mean, especially artists that are focused on this subject matter. The other thing I wanted to mention about my process is that I'm very interested in creating hybrid work, so work that combines different disciplines together and also combines new technologies and old technologies. Hence the idea that I like to use gold leafing, metal leafing, which has a tradition going back thousands of years, with digital technology. So what you see here is a large chromogenic print from one of the Polaroid images, and this one has no particular leaf added, but oftentimes I'll put them on canvas and then go back and rework the pieces with additional applications of leaf. This again is another large chromogenic piece from a Polaroid. And this one is actually the final image that I brought, which for me is, I call this, it's called Vapor Trails, and for me this kind of merges the water and the sky, just in its suggestion and in its gesture also. So I thought I would end my slide presentation with this image, which kind of merges the initial images of water and the images of space and the sky.
Great, thanks, Victor. Let's move you over here. So, actually, let's move all these over as people come up. Are we going to be?
A chromogenic is a very high quality digital output from a digital file on a printer. So it's like one of the highest quality digital prints that one can get nowadays. Very archival, very brilliant, and similar to a Cibachrome. If you remember the Cibachromes, which are pre-digital technology that was photographic, these are now the complement of that in the digital world.
How big are how big is that?
This piece is about, I think it's about 60 by 72, something like that, or maybe 48 by 72 inches.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit, you were mentioning how the Polaroid used to be this day-to-day object that everybody knew, and then you married it with this really ancient technique of gold leafing, which is of course also very elite. But now that the Polaroid is becoming expensive and no longer there, like can you talk a little bit about what that means for your art now for the next generation for whom Polaroids are just as exotic as gold leafing?
Well, time waits for no one. So it's like, you can use a technology and then all of a sudden it becomes obsolete or difficult to find. And what that becomes then is just a challenge for the artist to see how you're going to adapt to a changing environment, whether it's materials, whether it's subject matter, or whether you get burnt out on a subject matter and you have to look for something new. I think the key for me, because I'm an artist who likes to continue to investigate and explore, is that if the Polaroid was no longer available, I would have to, out of necessity, find another way to express what I'd like to express. So I'm not sure what that would be, but it wouldn't stop me from making visual statements.
Yes, back there.
I noticed
For the broadcast.
It's all right. I noticed that you were saying that all your Polaroids started with pictures of water, and yet there were quite a few different colors in a few of the Polaroids that you did. I'm wondering whether those were sunset or whether you added lights to it or any sort of
With the ones that you're referencing, that's a variegated metal leaf, which is heat treated, which allows it to have a palette of colors that are all unique to each sheet of leaf, but also gives me a palette of colors to play with artistically. So I'm making choices by virtue of which shades of leaf I'm choosing. It's almost just like a palette like any other artist would have with oil paints or oil pastels or watercolors. So it's kind of my palette is what you're seeing.
Well, there were a few that it looked to me, at least, I feel I could tell where the leafing was, and that the base Polaroid had color to it. So
that might have been from the light. Like there's one up there that's kind of got like kind of a green tint to it.
Yeah,
with gold.
Green and blue. There's some blues behind it, but one of the things that you blew up big, and you said it blew up big, and then you added the gold leafing to it afterwards.
Right, that
had some reds in it.
Yeah, that's from the variegated leaf.
Okay.
Yeah, the patterning of that particular style of leaf. And by the way, the leaf, for those of you who don't know, they're like, the metal leaf is about 5 inches by 5 inches, and the real gold leaf is probably about 3.5 by 3.5. So they're very small sheets. So when you're doing a big canvas, it takes a long time to cover a big canvas as you're putting down little sheets onto large canvases.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I probably should apologize because I just want to reiterate his question because, I mean, I'd like to hear the answer. I mean, I interpreted his question to mean that one of the things that's important to you is that you marry, two different sorts of technology, one that's very old and one that's very modern. I thought what he was asking was, what's your reaction, to the potential effect on, a future audience, for whom each of these technologies are, equally exotic. Not so much the effect on you, but the effect on them.
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't really think about it in those terms. I kind of think about it more in terms of the process of making the work, how an audience is going to respond to the work. I'm as surprised as anyone else. And as it changes over time, that's part of the delight for me as an artist, is just to see what the reaction will be. I hope it's positive. I hope people are sparked by it. I hope that they can read something into it, but I think, because of the nature of the work, everybody's going to get something a little different out of it. And I know that may not directly answer your question, but I think it's probably the best answer I could give at the moment.
Okay, let's hold other questions for the Q&A that will ensue after all the artists have talked about their work. And I'd like to bring up the next artist, the one artist working in 3 dimensions in the exhibition, Birgit Lassmann, right? Faustmann, Entschuldigung. Birgit Faustmann, who's applied the physical principles almost to in an architectural approach, creating structures that build out, that open up relational principles that are given both 2- and 3-dimensional form in her work. I'll let her elucidate further.
So I will read my explanation in German, and Klaus Barlow will translate it in English. I don't know. You feel comfort?
Yeah.
So I find mine.
Yeah.
Als ich angefangen habe, so zu arbeiten, wie ich jetzt seit ca. 15 Jahren arbeite, hatte ich es ein ganz starkes Anliegen. Ich wollte wissen, was ist Form und wie entsteht Form.
So when I began to work in this form, in this kind of way, there was a very important point of interest to me. What is form and how does form arise?
Ich fing an, von der Idee des Grundrisses auszugehen, den ich entwerfe mit einer dreidimensionalen Idee im Hinterkopf.
I began to work with the idea of a ground plan with a three-dimensional projection, you might say, in the back of my mind.
Dieser Grundriss bestand in früheren Arbeiten aus 4 Elementen, die durch eine Überschneidung von 2 Achsen zustande kommen.
Could you say that again? Beginning?
Dieser Grundriss bestand in früheren Arbeiten
Got
aus
it.
4 Elementen.
This ground plan consisted of 4 elements which were transected by an axis.
You see here, sometimes I work with the square shapes, and sometimes I work with the circle shapes. You see it in the next. Here, you see it in the next one. Here I pick the circle shapes. So, auf der einen Achse befinden sich Kreise und auf der anderen Quadrate, die sich progressiv größer bzw. kleiner werden.
So you have circles on the one axis and squares on the other axis, getting larger or smaller as the case may be progressively.
Zur Bearbeitung dieses Grundrisses habe ich längere Zeit auch ein dafür entwickeltes Programm benutzt, Computerprogramm benutzt.
So in order to do this work, I used a computer program specially written for this job, this work of mine.
Von diesem Grundriss aus erheben sich Schichten in die 3. Dimension, die sich schrittweise verschieden nach oben arbeiten.
From this ground plan, there is a development in the 3rd dimension, moving progressively upwards from the plan, right?
Ja. Manche machen dies in einer Drehbewegung.
Some of these do this in a kind of rotational form.
So these shapes you see here are the forms I used in the next work here. This is made from the shape of the former ground plan. And then there is another one, next one. This is actually here you have an axis. About here you have an axis, and the whole thing rotates around this.
It's a vertical axis, right?
Yeah, it's a vertical axis. And the next one has an axis about a longish axis, and goes through the whole thing, and rotate around that. So then, manche weiten oder verjüngen sich,
Some expand, some contract or converge.
like this one, or like the next one. Manche erheben sich durch Faltung.
Some of them rise through folding.
Oh, that's not actually I should no. Oh. Okay. Not there. The folding is not there. Okay, we have to get to the next one. It's oder auch langsam zu einem Kubus. Like
Or some develop themselves into a cube.
manchmal gehen mehrere Prozesse zusammen einher.
Sometimes several processes work at the same time.
So like here you have the rotation and slowly a writhing process. This is the principle of this one you saw before from above. And this one is also a kind of a writhing and rotation form. Nach einer gewissen räumlichen Höhe der jeweiligen Arbeit mache ich Schnitte in die sehr perfekten und manchmal symmetrischen Formen.
So after a certain height has been reached by this process into the third dimension, I then make sections or cuts into what's otherwise a very perfect and a sometimes very symmetrical form.
Diese Schnitte geben etwas über die Form preis, das sonst nicht sichtbar wäre.
This procedure exposes aspects of the form which would otherwise not be evident.
Sie geben dem Ganzen eine komplett neue Perspektive und eine neue, manchmal auch unerwartete Gestalt.
They give the work a new perspective, sometimes a very surprising one.
Der Schnitt selber hat wieder etwas Flaches an sich, das aber von sehr komplexer Natur ist.
The cut itself is flat, but it's of very complex nature.
You see cut one of them, and this is the folding thing, and you see the cuts over there, cutouts. Or here, this is a big cut of one of them. Okay, that's it. Thank you. I have to stand
there. I found myself provoked by the images and the discussion you just gave. In not so much by science, by the scientific issues, because I think the issues of physical form are opened up and manifested with great articulation and deliberation, and your discussion made that abundantly clear, but the art historical relationships have come to intrigue me. That I know that there is a tradition going back at least to the Bauhaus in Central Europe of explicating not simply geometric form, but scientifically explicated form as art. I guess the tradition of konkrete Kunst, and clearly your work is in this trajectory. Were there any of the artists we associate with konkrete Kunst, or even the Bauhaus from which this look at the konkrete Kunst came, whose approach, whose look, whose attitude particularly influenced you?
Actually, Klee, Paul Klee, and a little bit also Kandinsky, but later, I must say, much more the minimal art here from America.
That would make sense because the your work seeks almost to avoid elaboration and complexity. It seems to want to explicate and present in as simple a manner as possible the intersection of systems it wants to open up form as opposed to thicken the visual field. So that makes sense. Which minimalists in particular?
So Louis.
Louis, yeah.
And also Donald Judd.
Donald Judd. Yeah. Not Agnes Martin less?
No, not.
Yeah. But given that, still this work essentially in marrying, I guess, European and American attitudes, which the European attitude of close study and the American attitude of broad form. There is an attitudinal hybrid that manifests here. That it looks at a microcosmic and a macrocosmic effect at the same time. so that the work feels at once theoretical and practical. Was that your intent, or is that?
Practical side, I don't understand.
That we can see not simply the logic of the process, the logic of the mapping, but the logic of the structure that results. That it seems to be based on that it seems to articulate physical principle. Ja, vielleicht ist es, ja, macht nichts, but maybe, huh? Yeah? Hat sie Schwierigkeiten?
Ich bin nicht ganz sicher, ob ich das genau verstanden habe.
Ja, vielleicht einen klaren soll übersetzen. Ja.
Es geht darum, dass die Europäer auf der einen Seite sehr konzentriert arbeiten und die Amerikaner öffnen.
Ja.
Auf diese Weise hast du zwei Aspekte vereint in deiner Arbeit.
Ah, okay.
Und
ja.
das ist so gleich theoretisch wie praktisch.
Ja, ein Mittelpunkt zwischen dem praktischen und die theoretische, so zum Beispiel. Kann sein?
Ja. Könnte sein.
Oder ist das für mich nur Traum?
No, every point of view is allowed.
Yeah. Back there. Oh yeah, we have to get the. Turn it on.
Bad director. Birgit, I wonder if you have thought about, or others have spoken about your work in terms of its utilitarian and cultural resonances. For example, stairways, furniture, stacked boxes, buildings, and so on.
Yeah, people keep telling me they would like to go in a building like this. So they would like to have that as a staircase and so on, yes. And actually I would like to do something like this in much bigger dimensions. I would like to, but maybe that in the stars, I don't know.
Other questions for the moment? No? Okay. Then let's call up, is Alejandro here?
Yes.
Oh, good. Alejandro, and the last name, Casazi?
Casazi.
Casazi.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Birgit. Vielen Dank. Können Sie uns, okay. Alejandro Casazi's work, as you see upstairs, is based entirely, at least from the work presented here, entirely in the graphic. But I think I'm going to cede to him immediately to unfold his work.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jean-Pierre, for organizing this KITP, for hosting, and Peter, thank you very much for speaking with us. I work mainly with print media. I teach printmaking here at UCSB, lower division class on printmaking. And I selected a series of prints only for this exhibition, even though I work with video also, installation, and performance pieces. I selected a small amount of prints to show in here, especially two different techniques that I developed here at UCSB while working in here. They're based on this series of drawings that are called the breathing exercises. These are large-scale drawings in which each exhalation is drafted with a stroke of graphite, the same length of my body. And it has to do with exercises of equality from the reality that I grew up in, which is a long story short. It leaves everyone in the same state of biomechanical activities as breathing or pulsation. And these pieces talk about equality. I can explain a little bit more of that afterwards, but this is graphite etching, which I'm going to jump really quickly. Started out as these monotype graphite prints. These are a series of prints that I created in here while working monotype technique on copper plates that were heated up and then afterwards drafted with graphite, very soft graphite on top of the copper plates, and afterwards printed on these sheets of paper while holding still the composition of the breathing exercises. So I have two of these prints up there that you can take a look at them. They belong to this series that are called Ondaiku, digital haikus, that were exhibited at in an installation with some small videos. So my original intention when I started working with this monotype prints of graphite was to transmit electricity through the graphite using the graphite as a medium to transmit the electric impulses. The problem was that when I started making these prints, because they were still handmade strokes, there were uneven amounts of graphite throughout the strokes of the print. So I would lose the connection of the electric impulse through the graphite. So afterwards, I developed this technique that it's the graphite etching, in which I etch the paper and I compress graphite inside of the paper with compressed air. And that's the other print that you can see upstairs. Showing it here at the KITP, I actually called it graphene, which I know it's a very it's a lively subject here among physicists, but also addressing the super flat qualities of the graphene itself. It talks about these super flat surface of this print, and this print of equality again, equal channels of equal depth that has equal amount of graphite throughout the whole print. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Here, Alejandro. So your work is in this exhibition represents the biomechanical, the building out of scientific principle built from the body itself, although pointing at, if not actually exploiting, new research in well, if it's graphene in nanophysics, of course on a metaphorical basis. But so you move, in fact, from the actuality of your own physical biomechanical limitations and abilities to the theoretical condition of a physics much smaller, on a much different scale, and having to do with much different conditions, but ultimately similar principles.
Right. And also, it's interesting that you talk about scale, because in the end, these prints that are these large prints resemble chips, like electronic chips. Mm-hmm. Even though chips are starting to become smaller and smaller, these prints are just like these large-scale chips. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So, which is another level of metaphor, right, of the visual metaphor, as opposed to the procedural metaphor of graphene that you're having here. You had a question back there. Hold on. Let's.
Oh, for the broadcast stuff.
Yeah, I noticed upstairs when looking at that it said freehand, and I noticed how perfect some of the ellipses seemed. I mean, overlapping. Were you using anything, or is that truly you are like freehanding that all the way around?
That's a very good question. The label is not very accurate with the actual print. It is a print, and I have several copies of that. I can actually make several copies because it's done through a machine. So the drawing is translated into this digital file that afterwards is pre-cut in this paper with a machine that creates channels that are equally in depth and in width that are afterwards filled with graphite. Very thin powder of graphite with compressed air. So these channels, if you touch it, it's the same the surface is very equal, and the channels are filled with the graphite. So there is no drawing on top of it, or there is no print, there is no ink on top of it. The drawing is etched in the paper.
I get that. So, and the graphite's absorbed into it.
Yes.
Okay. So if the graphite's absorbed into it, though, in terms of how you're creating the ellipses, I guess I'd like to know how you're creating that freehand or with some help from something else.
No, it was originally done freehand by doing the exhalations, yes. And afterwards, that freehand drawing, it's translated through a digital process into the paper, even though it doesn't change at all the original drawing. It's just the quality of having the possibility of reproducing it in a graphic media.
Got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, here. Oh, well, let's get you the. Thank you.
What makes the channels in the paper?
It is a large tool used for cutting that you can calibrate the pressure, the speed, and also the type of blade that you're using. So it's a research I've been doing between preparing the paper, the right type of paper, preparing the paper, and preparing a machine that was not designed to do this, but I'm using it for it.
What was the machine designed to do?
To cut on vinyl.
Oh.
Yes.
So that's what I wondered. Thank you.
You mentioned at the beginning that the graphite is a good conductor for electricity.
Yes.
So do you at some point use that for electricity?
Yes. Well, the one that it's upstairs, it only has one channel for opening it, and it's right here. You will see in one of the edges there's a line that bleeds outside of the paper. You need another line to bleed out on the other side of the paper, or at another point of the paper in order to connect to an electric impulse. I started doing with sound because I could draw different resistances, and depending on the impulse that you project in these channels, the sound will vary depending on the drawing. So each print would have a different sound. In the end, it was like the sound of these prints. But you can work with different electric impulses as light.
So would the electricity burn the graphite? Does it burn the paper, or it's
no,
just
it's
for light to a visual effect?
You can't see anything. You can't see the electricity traveling through the graphite. Well, not like this, but so it's very small amounts of electricity. Yeah, I don't work with high voltages.
Okay. Anyone else? You might have noticed a visual resemblance between Alejandro's work and that of the last artist we're having talking today, the last of the four of the six who are able to be with us today, and who is the KTAV's artist in residence, Jean-Pierre Hébert. Of course, Jean-Pierre's work manifests a less biologically embodied physics and more I don't want to call pure physics because simply by manifesting it, it becomes impure. But the images themselves elucidate a sense of physics in as pure a state as can be seen. And I think what's fascinated me about Jean-Pierre's work since I was introduced to it is this search in an area between the purity of the concept and the impurity of the manifestation. That's I know only for me an art theoretical description of Jean-Pierre's investigations, and he certainly can discuss the substance of his investigations better than I can, and would like to have him up. Alejandro, can you join us there? Thank you.
Well, I think I would like to present some images first.
Please.
And then we can talk.
Best way.
Okay, so actually you will see how much Alejandro's work is close to what I try to do, but I have not met him yet. And I've never been able to approach the right breathing. And so after my first tries, I was like the pilot trying to draw a mouton for Le Petit Prince. And let me start that. So I have tried once, and I'm not able to run my own computer. Well, I know what's going on. I'm sorry. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so I tried that, and it did not work. I tried that, and it did not work because I don't really know how to breathe. And then I tried this.
Ça bouge pas. No. Okay.
I tried this, and I tried that, and this is only good for cartoons. So I started my work very differently many years ago, and started to try to think about it in a different way. And I decided to use mathematics and programming and the power of computers. And I started to do things like that. But that's seen from very close. This is a series of images of lines that I have developed recently for my website. And so you will see lines from close, because all of my work is based on lines, because I think it's all drawings. And it's actually lines that are actually meeting waves and vibrations. So the first lines are made with pencil, and they are seen at different scales, at different distances. Here you have two different LEDs. What you see on these first images is that as I can control what I do with extreme precision, I can actually call on some number of properties and characteristics of lines and light that by free hand I would not be able to. So this is a tool for me to extend what I'm trying to do, to see, to observe, and this is what I try to give examples of.
Now, is there any way of...
What do you want?
Écraser.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So this is...
No, oh, okay.
No, it disappears.
Good, okay.
So this is the last close-up from pencil lines. All those lines are drafted on a machine, on a plotter, and the plotter holds a lead and applies it against the paper. And what is interesting in everything I do is that I'm trying to remember what Jean Cocteau was saying about drawings. Jean Cocteau was doing drawings, and his idea of drawings was that if the line is alive, the drawing is beautiful. And I'm trying to do lines that are alive, but using a process that is far from obvious, using mechanical devices, using digital capabilities of different tools. I'm trying to give life to lines. This is a drawing with pen and ink, and it shows actually a symmetry similar to the one you can find at the Alhambra, but which is projected on a wave. And so this is why it doesn't have the classical shapes, but it's based on the same geometry put in a higher dimension space. These are lines made with pen and ink. This one too. This one also. And so you can see that I can get to an extreme degree of control, and I can breathe as I want when I do that. And now the breathing can be kind of agitated, but that's part of the transformation that I submit the lines to. Using those tools sometimes has some inconvenience, and this is an example of them. When this happened, I was very unhappy. The plotter is actually, the ink is being clogging the pen, and the drawing cannot finish. Years ago, I was actually throwing away those pieces, and now these are the one I like the best because they show accidents. And this is another accident where the inking has been, jumping here and there erratically. I have tried also to do lines with brushes. There is an image that is missing, which I could not find on my collection of images in my computer, which was a superposition of this line, which is actually traced by a brush and watercolors, and the same line drafted at the exact same scale with a pen. And so you can see on this mixed drawing that the pen is absolutely rigorous in its trajectory, while the tip of the brush is actually flexing left and right and gives the line a life in itself. And this is another example of a drawing done with a brush. And you see some of the effects of a sumi painting, of a brush that runs out of ink, which I particularly like. Then I have also tried to work with prints, and I'm showing here a couple of images of engravings on copper plates, and the results, which are the prints. So here's the first plate, that's the second plate, very intricate. It's done on an engraver that is computer driven, and this is the result. And the plate was actually engraved through a very fine varnish, then exposed to acid, and the result tried to equal the beautiful quality of dry points, which is a traditional etching method. And this is a very high resolution of the result. I also, as you can see downstairs, I love to trace ephemeral lines in sand, and these are done with a system based on motors, magnets, computers, but the idea is to hide everything as much as possible and just see the surface of the sand so that the mystery is total. That's another images of lines in the sand. I'm also often going to the Getty and taking pictures of the same water that Victor is looking at. And after doing a few images, I try to do the same thing myself. And so this is a result trying to play with a Tibetan bowl, with a singing bowl, filled with water and making pictures of that. We tried to actually be able to resonate the ball without having to strike it or without having to rub a piece of wood around, but we could not master the technique. So we did something else like this using sound. Some of you have seen this piece at CAF 2 years ago. But now I'm also using new tools like digital printing. And I now have a printer that has made most of the works that you can see upstairs, which can print with really an exquisite resolution, very fine lines. And now I can also have colors. I don't use them much because I have very little training with colors. So most of the time my works have just subdued colors like this. Actually, I think this is a white drawing on a colored background. And this is a black drawing, and this is an edge of the same drawing. And you can see that the surface from left to right, the dimension must be about 6 inches. That gives you an idea of how fine those lines are. And I'm really delighting into that. But the result is that my work often looks like a spider web, and the spiders like it. So that's the last image.
Given the kind of time we've already used up, I think we, unless any of the artists has anything to ask or say to any of the others immediately, I'd like to open it up to final questions from the audience. For Jean-Pierre in particular, or the artist altogether. Yes. Yeah.
All of you seem to create very complicated systems and then try and represent them. Are you happier with the result when it's unexpected or when the system is very clearly explained? Or put another way, when these things become more didactic, do they get better for you or do they get better as they become more obscure?
Well, if I can answer, I think all the situations can be excellent. It's very good to try to do something that is very complicated with an idea in mind and verify that you actually get to the target you fix for yourself and that the result is interesting also and pleases you. But it's also very interesting to write code to create an image and have bugs and discover some things that you would never have been thinking of before and be surprised. And actually, I like to be now in between, like many artists currently. I've been very much impressed by the writing of John Cage, more by his writing than by his music, actually. But what I like in it is the insistence on chance. And while chance can be used in a wild way and conduct to erratic results, which are not necessarily pleasant, you can actually guide it, and this is what I try to do. I try to be myself within the 2 poles that you mentioned and get a result that surprises me and pleases me at the same time. And this is how I'm doing the work I am doing now, like the one that you can see upstairs.
That's a very short question. Can you describe the machine or the devices that guide the pencils and the brushes?
Well, it's a very simple device. It moves the paper in one direction, in X, for instance, and you have a rail on which you can drive a pencil or a pen that moves in Y direction. So by sending the right information, the right coordinates, you can place the tip of the marking tool exactly where you want on the paper, and you can trace whatever you want. So the idea is to want something and to describe it and get all the data that will actually produce the work.
And that
Yes.
I don't know if any of the other artists want to take the opportunity to answer that question about welcoming the accidental.
Yeah. You know, I think as a creative artist, you look for those opportunities. They're kind of gifts that come to you, and it's taking an approach more that you don't deny the accident. The accident, there is no accident. I mean, it's all part of the process, and those things that you find that are unexpected are oftentimes gateways to new directions that you can take the work and that you can push it. So I don't know, you know, and maybe there's a lot of scientists here can talk about that from a scientific point of view of their own practice and investigation, but I would imagine that on a creative side of physics, there's probably a similar kind of parallel to that. You know, it's like, you know, you set up a framework for you to do a certain kind of work, but the framework was really only there to facilitate discoveries, exploration, investigation, and challenging yourself so that you're not continually repeating yourself and you're trying to find new opportunities to stretch yourself.
I can't add anything to it. The same.
Well, yeah, accidents create rhythm. You know, they're the gap that you always want to fill, so it keeps you moving. I think that's the best quality of the accident. I think that the accident, it's an accident and it's something that it's not accurate, but it makes you move, and that's important. You would be very static if you didn't have accidents.
I'm mindful of a maxim that I've heard in other contexts, but, you know, suggesting that we create the accidental lucky outcomes. We have a role in those unanticipated outcomes, and the maxim is luck is the residue of preparation.
Absolutely, and also paying attention, not looking for accidents, but finding them and regarding them not as interference, but as gateways to new axioms.
Peter, I want to thank you for coming to town. I'm Elaine Lavasser, and we cross paths internet-wise sometimes. I just want to say that I've been coming to the Friends KITP lectures for some years now. And I am an artist, of course, essentially not a scientist, but I've really, really enjoyed the black holes discussions and exploding stars. But tonight I really get it. Thanks for your articulation. I really, really see what Dr. Gross has seen now, finally, the connection between how scientists work and how artists work. It's totally, totally clear to me. I see the pattern of experimental setup and the training that is behind it, that is decades long, that comes out of an attraction to process that both scientists and artists have. And all along the whole time, really, the scientists that I've seen come here, they have they're dying for the thrills. They really are, in the same way that an artist is dying for the thrill of the result. And then when it doesn't work out, they need to manage the disappointment, and then they go again. It's really a relentless struggle to see what they haven't yet seen and to know what they haven't yet known through their process, and it's really very, very similar. So thank you.
Sure. Somebody said that the two kinds of people who can stay up all night working on something and not notice that they've stayed up all night are artists and scientists.
Well, thank you all, and thank you to KITP for having this. I have a question that's maybe it's for the physicists or for KITP, or maybe for the dialogue between the artists and the physicists, and it's to do with the phenomenon of art. And let me see how I can say it. Basically, the what I find myself thinking is that the close observation of the evidence of the physical world has led us to physics and then to quantum mechanics. and then to a reality which is really deeply counterintuitive and difficult to explain. And then theoretical physics tries to provide models for this and tries to look at this very difficult reality and try to shed whatever light there is. And we do this, impressively and with great investment and great effort. Now, it seems like humans have been making art for a very, very long time. Whatever any particular artist may say, there's this incredible body of work that goes back a very long time, which, in a certain sense, is a body of evidence. It's objectively there. People have been doing this, and the question then becomes, and this is the question really that I'm trying to bring up to everyone, especially the physicists, though, and it's looking at this work and the sum of art. What is the reality of which art is the evidence? Does that make sense? Like, what is it? Like, the reason I'm bringing it up that way is because the fact that quantum mechanics is difficult hasn't stopped us from trying to explain it, but the fact that art is difficult stops us in our tracks, which doesn't make any sense. I mean, very smart people ought to be able to shed some light on it, I would argue.
Whoa. Yeah, right. Well, is there a physicist in the house?
He's not like he can't prove them all. Well, I think Peter did a pretty good job at.
We opened it up to everybody, so moving along.
I think I believe there is a real world out there.
Or in there.
There's a real world which, we are part of, and we are evolved to make sense of it and to appreciate it and to find order and structure in something we call beauty, which I believe is an evolved sense of the reward for making a bit of sense of something. And therefore, and we approach it in many different ways. One which has been highly developed and pursued very successfully is physics, one extreme. But it's part of a way, grasping reality, of which mathematics is a very strong component, the language physics uses, but which has its own universe of generalization and playfulness and beauty. And then what's being discussed here are little freer attempts in a sense. But that freedom and leads, as you described, to accidents and to discoveries which are pleasing and instructive and stimulating. And I think that's, for me, the great attraction of art. But is there a reality behind it? Yeah, I think so. I think there's one real world, reality, which we all connect. It's all connected. And the reason we find things beautiful, I believe, is also understandable. We don't yet understand it, but we someday perhaps will. And it is, as I said, an evolved reward system for understanding and appreciating more about this bigger reality. So we scientists get that when we develop quantum mechanics, say, and it works in explaining the structure of atoms and how why stars explode, and if you play around with these forms and create something new way of visualizing lines and shapes and colors, you also get a reward. We're programmed evolved to get such rewards, and the fact that those rewards are so profound in both art, music, and science can only mean that they're highly connected. They, in some deep sense, resonate with a structure of reality. Now, you unfortunately, we have very good ways of testing what is true or what works, whereas you tend to have more disagreements often. I'm not sure which is better, though.
Art is
my view.
Yeah. Art has been described as science with the subjectivity reintroduced, and science has been described as art with the ego removed. Not all the way. It's not simply a matter of art and science being able to talk to one another. It's a matter of recognizing that they start from the same point of view of perception and examination, and who's talking to what, and who's talking to whom about what, specifically. I saw there was a. To continue upstairs, exactly. Fueled by the elements. Thank you very much.